This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast. In-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mātauranga Māori. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr Barb, and we have back in the studio today Yoram Barak, Associate Professor for the Old Age Psychiatry at the School of Medicine here at Otago University, consultant for the closed inpatient services for older patients struggling with psychiatric disorders as well. So part clinical, part research there. And we're very, very happy to have you back here for what is the part 3, the second part with yourself on our Coping with Dementia mini-series. And of course we had the amazing Antoinette McLean from Alzheimer's Otago in here and talked about the Christmas tips and tricks and tips for travelling and, you know, some basic communication things and where to get help from, and also going to your GP, getting your, just talking things over with your GP. That's a really great place to start. And Alzheimer's Otago is really great with lots of information for yourself or for a loved one who you suspect may have dementia, or what we're now calling it, major neurocognitive impairment, MNCI. And also, of course, Alzheimer's Otago is called Alzheimer's Otago, but also does all types of dementia, which we learned last time. There are very many, more than I expected.
And I think that historically and for many people, Alzheimer's disease represents any and all dementias, but it's not. It is a unique disease. It was for many, many decades thought to be the most common disease causing dementia syndrome, but there are people who doubt that. But that's sort of a complex scientific argument. I think it's important for people to know that we cannot diagnose Alzheimer's disease in life. People get mixed up about that. We can, with a very, very high probability, can say that the dementia the person is struggling with is probably or possibly driven by Alzheimer's disease. But we can't be definite because Alzheimer's disease is a pathological diagnosis. You need to find and identify the changes that happen in the brain. Wow. We can't do that when people are alive unless we do a brain biopsy. People are not really happy with that one. We used to do
Of course, a brain biopsy is actually taking a piece of your brain and looking at it under the microscope.
Which we used to do in the 50s and 60s, but somehow people are not that keen on having a very, very fine microscopic needle inserted into their brains. I don't know why, but people are not happy with that.
Yeah, it's funny. So, I mean, it leads me to my first question there, is the actual process of dementia. And you've hinted there that there's you've strongly said rather than hinted that there's different types of dementia. Mm-hmm. Dementia. What is actually physically happening inside someone's brain?
Okay, so that's complex, but I'll try to simplify that. The large majority of dementias, like Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, etc., are what we call the degenerative dementias. What happens is that your brain atrophies, or if you like, in layman's persons, your brain shrinks.
Right.
It shrinks. You can see that literally in imaging of the brain by brain CT or MRI.
Yeah.
And the shrinkage of the brain is due to the loss of gray brain cells, what we call the neurons. Right. The brain cells that actually do the hard work of thinking,
joining up thoughts,
and remembering and producing words and understanding language, etc. There are many, many changes in the supporting cells of the brain, but in the degenerative dementia, we lose the gray matter, if you like, of the brain, which is the active, important neurons that actually do the work of remembering, thinking, and other brain functions. Why do we lose them? Why do they die? Is it just an amplified form of aging? Because there is a change in brain volume as we age.
Right.
For
Just
people,
normally.
Yeah, for people who are completely symptom-free, who are normal and high-functioning. But that change would be maybe 1 to 2% decrease in brain volume every 5 years after the age of 65.
Right.
While in Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about a loss of brain volume by a factor of 10 higher than the normal loss.
Right, so 10% every 5 years.
Sort of, yeah. And the problem is that although we can very accurately, due to immense investment in research over the 20th century mainly, but also, the last 24 years, we can detail very, very accurately the process of what is happening and why we're losing brain cells once the diagnosis is established. We have absolutely no idea what begins, what is the initial change or driver or pathogen or pathology
we need to scan
that
a lot
starts
of people
the whole thing.
Before they have dementia.
We do that. We know that some of the changes start in your mid-30s.
Oh, dear.
But why is that starting? We don't know the why. We know everything about the how.
Right.
We can tell you what will happen in a month and what happens at the microscopic level and what molecules are involved in the changes that cause the death of brain cells. We know practically everything and anything about that. We know nothing about why is this happening.
Wow.
And that is probably, in a simplified way, one of the main reasons why we haven't come up with a cure or a treatment. You can't cure something if you don't know what is the cause of the disease.
That makes total sense. And
But the good news is you can prevent something without having any idea about what is causing it.
Can you?
Of course. Just think diabetes, okay?
Yes.
We know that people who are overweight are more likely to develop diabetes.
It's just a correlate. Yeah, we know that. We just
it's an association.
Yeah.
Do we know how overweight causes diabetes? I don't know. I don't think there are many theories, but the mechanism, why if I were to put on 20 kilos, why would I develop diabetes? Is it the fat tissue that's impacting the pancreas? Who knows?
Yeah.
And who cares?
Yeah.
So maybe endocrinologists know, not my field of expertise, but who cares? If you help people lose weight, you are preventing diabetes without even having the most basic rudimentary idea of the process.
Yeah.
Who cares? Help people lose weight, we'll have less diabetes. Yes. Thank you, bye.
That's true.
That is the beauty of prevention. Prevention is complex, but the assumptions based on association are much easier to address than if you are looking for causality.
Yeah,
for
and causality
the why.
is really hard to prove, eh?
And very hard to untangle. Because if the changes in your brain when you're 78 and been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease started when you were 37...
a lot of water's gone under the bridge there.
God, what are we going to do? How can we even investigate what happened way back? And
I mean, we could
and our
start...
ability to reverse a process that started 20, 30 years ago.
Do things like the Dunedin study, those big longitudinal studies, do they shed some light on that? Because
they will
be going so long.
The
I mean,
people,
obviously they haven't gotten that age group from the Dunedin study, isn't...
No, the original Dunedin study participants are 51 or 52 now.
Yeah, 52 this year.
They should see a pediatrician, not me. I mean, really, they're young.
No, it's true.
We will need 30 more years before we learn from them.
Yeah.
But there are other studies.
But none as good as the Dunedin study.
Now, you've put me in a spot. No, none as good in the sense the Dunedin study is the only study that followed people from birth.
Right.
Is it the longest study ever in the history of medicine? No.
Oh.
So, yeah, it is better designed.
Right.
But between the two world wars, a group of American scientists led by Valent, he was obviously a psychiatrist, a very, very young man at that time, and he was looking at, they had the big depression and things were not going well for many people in the States, and he said, hey, I want to be able to help people, and I want to study successful aging. So he went ahead and enlisted hundreds of people, young men, at 18 or 17, who were just accepted to their first year at Harvard University.
Right.
Which is
it's a big deal in America.
The crème de la crème of American society then. And he also enlisted or enrolled a group, hundreds of young men from Boston's inner city, which was actually a slum, the worst of the worst. They had no running water and a lot of abuse, little education, large families. So he said, I'll take the best of the best that America can offer, and I'll take people who are unfortunately, had excuse my French, the first 18 of lives.
Yeah.
And I will follow them until their death.
Right.
And he has passed on. The fourth director of the study is still running it. They still have just under 100 people in their mid and late 90s that are still being followed. So talk about, this study has been going on for more than 80 years.
Wow. And
so,
what's the answer?
Not as good as the Dunedin study, but maybe
longer.
Well, obviously longer.
Yeah.
And at some point along the way, what they did is they did two things. They enlisted the partners of these people and they followed them as well.
Ah.
And why am I saying that? Because one of the major findings of that study is if you want to age both healthy, physically and mentally, and happily, and with a high level of function, being completely independent into your 80s and 90s, the most important factor that predicts that is having a supportive partnership.
Wow.
Yeah.
I always heard that it was good for men to have a wife, but it actually decreased.
I knew you were going to say that. People quote that study all the time. They say, men benefit from marriage. Yes. But here are the true facts of the study that people quote without even reading.
Yeah.
When you compare men who are unmarried throughout their lives to men who are married or have a long-lasting partnership.
Yeah.
Men who are in a partnership do much better on physical and mental and quality of life outcomes. True. When you compare women who are in a partnership or married to women who are not, women do better in a partnership than women who are not in a partnership. So why is everyone saying, oh, men benefit from marriage? Because the gain
is better.
Is way, way higher for men than for women. Women who are in a partnership do a little better than women who are not. Men who are in a partnership do way better than men who are not. Yes.
And is that because
we are primitive and dependent?
Yeah.
We need you ladies to care for us.
Oh, yeah, is that right? Is it potentially more the social networking and the friend sphere that is possibly more common in...
So yes, and it has to do with preventing dementia.
Yeah.
So we are not sort of...
We are still talking about coping with dementia. We're not...
Loneliness is the number one risk factor for dementia.
Which is amazing, really, isn't it? Because
is it? Our brains are social organs.
Yeah.
Human beings are the most socially dependent organisms. We often think of the bees or the ants, and we think a beehive is a complex, sort of organism.
But compared to human societies, it's just
our embodiment in a social network is essential not only for survival, obviously, but for personal health and well-being.
And is that the fact that loneliness is what they call a modifiable cause or risk factor of dementia, does that mean that, like, if you put that together with your partnership study that you're talking about there, does that mean that in some ways, if you aren't lucky enough to have a partner, then being just involved in a community, having a strong set of friends, which may not be a large set of friends, but a strong set of friends, can compensate for or, do the same job as having a partner somewhere?
Not only do the same job, it is necessary. Because we are sort of mixing two different findings and studies. The study that looked at successful aging, called the Age SED, the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Now just think about Freud. We mentioned him in the former podcast.
Yeah.
The study looking at successful aging is called the SED study, the Study of Adult Development. What a stupid acronym for a study that is looking at successful aging.
It is very strange calling it SED.
But anyway, the SED study was looking at variables not preventing dementia. They were looking at what
gives you a good life.
What can predict a package that we call successful aging.
Yeah.
Dementia is just part of that.
Yeah.
You can age successfully and unfortunately end your life with dementia, but still have successful aging until
and it's not a competition,
stages.
Right?
It's not. But the studies looking at loneliness were looking at loneliness and intervening to help people become unlonely as a factor that increases your risk for dementia. So these are two different outcomes. So we can't really... They do overlap in a way, but we can't take them together. Loneliness is gender-specific, and you were hinting at that. Women throughout life are much less lonely than men, especially as women age. Men, beginning in midlife, are lonelier than women, and if they are lonely and poor as they age, they are way, way, way more likely to A, have developed dementia, B, to kill themselves.
Oh, gosh.
Suicide in New Zealand, in older adults, is driven mainly by loneliness and poverty.
Yeah.
So loneliness is a risk factor for many terrible health outcomes.
Yeah.
One of them, dementia.
Yeah.
And as you said, men and women differ, especially in Western societies where most of the research comes from, in the way they are embedded in a social network. Men have workmates very frequently, and when they retire, they find themselves.
So it's important to have those clubs and other interests and keep your school
It's
friends.
crucial, not only important, because if you're only social, if you like to call it interaction, is within your nuclear family, your wife, kids, grandkids, brothers or sisters, if you have any, that is not protective enough against dementia.
Right.
So, and that's one of the, I think, amazing findings we had here at the School of Medicine with the brilliant Prof. Paul Glue, where we looked at New Zealand centenarians.
Right.
Centenarians are a great group of people to look at if you want to study successful aging.
Right.
Because even by the simple definition of the fact that they have made it to 100 years of age, they are already outliers. They're already different than all of us.
Yeah. Because they're old. I'm totally envisioning that I'm going to live to be 100.
I wish you would, and may you do that with happiness and health. But at the moment, not at the people who are now 5 or 6 or 10 years old, but people who are in their midlife or entering older ages in their 60s, very, 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 very few of us will live to 100 years of age.
Okay.
So studying centenarians gives us a glimpse into people who are unique. In some way they are unique because they made it to 100 years of age. The Americans, we talked about the language differences, when they study centenarians, they call them super agers. They focus on centenarians who are physically, mentally, and cognitively in perfect health.
Right.
They live in the community, they're independent, they drive, they cook their own food, they still play golf maybe. Although I believe golf is a risk factor for dementia. I mean, seriously, how boring can it be to chase a ball and try to put it into a hole in the ground? Anyway, but that's probably because I did not grow up in a UK culture.
Yeah, and we did say we weren't talking about politics.
Good point. So the Americans call these people super agers, people who made it to 100 years of age in perfect health.
Right.
Physically, mentally, and cognitively. And just to give you an example of how cultures think differently, when we do studies with these amazing centenarians, we call them in the UK and in Germany and here in Australia, we call them the escapers.
The escapers?
They escaped everything that life can throw at you.
Wow.
They escaped being ill. They escaped losing their memory. They escaped being depressed.
Wow.
So, and I think it's it reflects how culturally different we are from many other Western countries. I think they're super agers.
Yeah.
But, sort of I love American movies, so super agers sounds brilliant, doesn't it? Much better than escapers. But when we went looking for these super agers, if you like, here in New Zealand, we quickly realized two things. A, New Zealand has way less centenarians than expected for a country of this size.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Countries with just over 5 million people are expected, high-income countries, statistically are expected to have just over 1,500 centenarians.
And how many have we got?
500.
It's a third.
Yeah, it's terrible. But when you look at centenarians the world over, again, Western countries and Japan, 80% of them, or 83% of them, are in nursing home or rest home struggling with physical and mental and cognitive disorders.
Yeah.
Only about 17% of them in the US are super agers.
Right. So it's the difference between being older and being older and healthy.
Yeah. So 17% of centenarians in the US are super agers.
Yeah.
They're out there, improving their golf handicap. In New Zealand, 50% of centenarians are super agers.
Oh, right.
3 times as much as any other country in the world. So the rate of super agers here is very high. The number of centenarians is very low. So But so that's something we're still looking into,
that's
why
interesting.
that is.
Yeah.
But when we looked into New Zealand super agers, the first thing that stood out was that our super agers, for their whole life, 100 years,
Yeah.
3 times a week went out of their, if you like, family daily life
Yeah.
and interacted socially in some way.
Some club type
Choir
thing.
practice, coffee with friends, a walking group, golf club,
Men's
whatever,
shed,
something. Men's
swimming,
shed, women's...
Anything that you're doing something with other people.
Yeah, anything and everything. Doesn't matter
Wow.
what.
Doesn't matter what, anything
It
you
doesn't
do.
matter
and,
what.
And I guess there's
But
classes.
there is a footnote to that.
Oh gosh, there's always a footnote.
There is, yeah. Man, psychiatry is always interesting. There's always more to learn.
Yeah. It's the
If you go out there and you volunteer,
yeah.
you don't just passively, sit with friends and have coffee, which is great, or go to the movies with your mates. If you volunteer,
Yeah.
you will be even a, sort of a superior super ager.
Wow. So that's like leveling up.
When
Basic
you,
super aging is just going out there and interacting
3 times a week,
3 times a week.
having a life away from your partner and family.
Right.
Friends, choir practice, whatever.
Yeah.
Playing croquet, I don't know, whatever people do out there. I never go out, but people do.
People do. Well, you're out here now. We're having a conversation. This is fun. It's like,
Yeah, well, maybe I'm preventing a bit of dementia coming on.
that's right. And then volunteer. And there's lots of great places, and I can just do a little plug here. There's lots of great places around Dunedin for you to volunteer.
Well,
for
I do. I'm
for
on the
all
board
sorts
of the
things.
Alzheimer's Society, and I'm on the abuse panel of Age Concern.
I wasn't meaning you specifically. I was meaning in general,
Yeah, but we need to encourage people to volunteer.
That's interesting, yeah. So volunteering is actually, they say, it's all giving back, it's all good for you. It's actual evidence for that.
People who volunteer are happier when you measure their level of happiness,
Wow.
and they are physically healthier. There was a study that was published about, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
It was called the Jerusalem Study of Aging.
Yeah.
So a group of geriatricians in Jerusalem, in those days, retirement from government or, sort of employment was mandatory at 65.
Yeah.
If you were a school teacher or you worked for the Ministry of Health or whatever, the LTA, you had to retire at 65. If you were lucky, they gave you sort of a cheap gold watch and off you went to have whatever it is that you have when you retire.
Yeah.
And they followed well over 20,000 civil servants who retired at 65 for 10 years.
Yeah.
At 75, they compared the people who are well, they're not super agers because they were only 75, but the people who were healthy, independent, enjoying a life, compared to the ones who died, the ones who didn't make it even to 75. And the only difference was that the people who were healthy and happy at 75 spent a minimum of 6 hours a week in volunteering.
Wow. See, 6 hours a week. 3 times a week, go out and see someone else.
Yeah.
6 hours of that.
Go to Age Concern. Become one of the volunteers who befriend people who are lonely.
Yeah.
Twice a week, go have a cup of tea, talk to someone who is lonely.
Yeah. Or, the Halo Project, Orokonui Eco Sanctuary, the Wildlife Hospital. We could talk here for ages and ages. There's heaps of things. Wow. So isolation is a big one. So we were talking about modifiable risk factors, and there has been a couple of studies that have come out recently talking about modifiable risk factors for dementia. Of course, there's the obvious risk factors for dementia which aren't modifiable, like you can't escape your age. That's just how many times you've been around. That's how many times you've been around the sun. That's just a fact. And gender, I guess.
Is it a fact?
I don't know. Well, unless you're an astronaut, because then apparently it changes.
I know.
I don't know.
I thought it was a gender thing because my wife and most of her friends are 28 and we've been married for well over 30 years. So go figure.
Right, leaving that aside, the modifiable risk. So we've talked about isolation a little bit. Shall I let you run through the others? Education. I don't know. Is education really a modifiable risk factor? Or
it is.
Or is
I
it just a
think,
correlate?
It is, because a brilliant group of French epidemiologists have managed to create equations that predict the rates of dementia if we could increase the level of education in the population. So what they say is that if we were able, which is just, sort of a theoretical exercise, but if we were able as a country to add one more year of formal education to everyone.
Yeah.
So if you went only to primary school, we'll
give you one more year
of secondary school.
Which is, of course, what we did with the first year free funding for university, right? Mm-hmm. So that's encouraging more people to go for an extra year at university compared to high school.
Or if you have a master's degree, you'll have 1 year of postgraduate studies.
Yeah.
So if we gave every single adult in New Zealand 1 more year of formal education, we will reduce the rate of dementia by nearly a third.
Wow, a third! That, when you look at some of those numbers of how much dementia care costs, even if you just did it on economic principles, that must be beneficial. Like, that must come out on the pro side.
So education is a big one. And of course, the one that I call the silent risk factor that nobody really wants to talk about, because most of the research comes from South America. Brazil have a very, very good group of dementia researchers. Poverty. It's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge in so many ways, well beyond dementia. It is estimated by the World Health Organization, WHO, that nearly 50% of all psychiatric disorders are driven in part or in full by poverty.
Wow. So something like, if we were trying to combat that as a country, something like the universal benefit, basically the first $10,000 that you earn, or...
I think there are many, many ways to go about poverty. I think one of the things that, as a psychiatrist, it's important to understand, again, at Harvard University, there is a Center for the Study of Poverty.
Yeah.
And very frequently I encounter people who say, oh, come on, poor people are just lazy. Let them get a job.
It's interesting.
And it's... The center at Harvard University was able to very clearly define and show that being born poor and being raised poor changes the way you problem solve.
Yeah.
It's not that you are lazy. You don't have the skills to problem solve the way you and I did. So if you went out, got into your car, it didn't turn. So you called someone, whatever, took it to the garage, and they told you, engine is gone. You need $5,000 to repair that. The way you would go about solving that problem is completely different than if you're, if you're poor, your car falls apart, and you're just faced with something that is for you. Because of the changes in the way your brain developed, because you were poor, you are unable to solve something as...
It's interesting,
something like that. So it's poverty won't be solved just by giving people money. We have to address the cognitive impacts of poverty and see if we can retrain people to problem solve differently.
Yeah. But I don't think it's just giving them money either. It's changing the way that our tax structure and a society thinks about the relative distribution of wealth, as opposed to just giving people money because,
And creating opportunities for young people, kids, adolescents.
And, even just using the social structure of society to even out the effects of poverty, and that's, a free school system, education is available to everyone, free health system,
to be fair,
dentistry.
I have never understood why education isn't free for everyone for as long as they want to study.
Well, of course, it used to be in New Zealand.
What's the big deal
Yeah.
of doing that? You know, in Denmark they have that.
Yeah. And we used to have it here in New Zealand
University is free.
Yeah.
Not only your first degree. If you want to do your master's, you don't pay. If you want to do a PhD,
used to be the same here in New Zealand. Yep. So
it is such a true investment in our future.
Anyway.
Modifiable
we're not going to
risk factors.
Other risk factors, yes.
Hearing loss and visual loss.
Yeah, so is that on top of isolation? Because I imagine that there is a certain amount of isolation from gradual hearing loss.
Yes.
Or
People
visual impairment.
who have the classic kind of midlife hearing impairment, if that is not addressed, will eventually sort of pull back on social interactions.
Yeah.
Because they
just can't keep up with conversation because
they can't follow. But there are also the biological underpinnings of the decrease in stimuli to the brain that increase your risk of dementia.
And if you've got hearing aids, wearing them must be a big thing.
Yes. Not forgetting them.
I know a number of people who have hearing aids but don't wear them.
That's fine.
I don't imagine
there are occasions where I take off my glasses.
Yeah.
You know.
So
you don't always want to hear or see what is happening.
So we've got also the obvious ones, I guess.
Diabetes.
Smoking, diabetes, alcohol, obesity,
high blood pressure.
All of those. Anything else?
All of those, but those are, again, brilliantly managed by GPs.
Right.
GPs do so well managing this, sort of the more vascular risk factors of dementia.
Right.
Because an American cardiologist who designed a special nutritional plan that reduces your risk of Alzheimer's disease by about 50% if you adhere to it.
Wow.
He said, and people were telling him, you're a cardiologist. What are you on about? Since when do you know anything about the brain? He said, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And he's right. Because think, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, smoking, alcohol, bad for your heart, bad for your arteries, bad for your brain. So he was really good, that guy. And he came up with something that's called the MIND diet, M-I-N-D. It's an acronym.
Diet. What does the MIND stand for?
Essentially, the Mediterranean diet. But the D stands for the DASH, which is another acronym, DASH, which is the dietary intervention to control high blood pressure.
Right, which is low salt.
Not only that. That's an important one, but it's not only that. So we knew of the DASH diet to control high blood pressure. It has been created and sort of, given a lot of campaigns and awareness in the US going on 30 years back.
I've never heard of it. The DASH diet.
Because you're not an American.
Yeah.
Very obviously not. The DASH diet helps control blood pressure way more effectively than any blood pressure lowering medication that we have.
Really?
It's amazing. You look at the studies and you go like, what?
I'm going to look
amazing.
It up. As soon as we're finished here, I'm going to look it up.
The only problem is, and when the New England Journal of Medicine sort of had a honorary editorial at the 25th anniversary of the DASH diet, they said there are literally thousands of studies proving how brilliant that is.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of studies showing that less than 2% of people with high blood pressure in the US actually use this nutritional plan to...
Why is that? Is it too strict? Has it not got bacon in it?
That's another podcast, food. Because food is not a straightforward thing for human beings. Food is a Freudian thing, if you like.
It's all about emotion. It's all about
And
social and family and tradition.
I mean, my mother was probably the world's worst cook. If they had a section for that at the Guinness Book of Records, she would have made it. She cooked the most terrible food ever presented to human beings. But still, when my brother and I, before she passed on, when we would come home to our parents' home to visit, what would we do first thing? Open the fridge, take something out, eat it, sit down and have a bit of food, because it's her food.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's terrible. I wouldn't offer it to anyone, but we were attached to it because it was her.
Yeah, it's
the smell, the spices. It's
and
food
coming up to
is so
Christmas,
much more than food.
Yeah, coming up to Christmas is never more obvious than that food really is not just.
So there's the DASH diet. So the MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet combined in a very intelligent way by this group of cardiologists and nutritionists. People who have people who have put junk into their bodies for 60 years, which most of us do. We eat terrible food. Terrible as nutrition-wise, not as enjoyable. People who were 60 and have had, just ate whatever.
Yeah.
And switched to the MIND diet.
Yeah.
And were followed for 5 years.
Yeah.
If they really adhere to the MIND diet, by the time they were 65, their risk of Alzheimer's disease was reduced by 53%.
Wow, 53%.
We have nothing like that in medicine.
Right. So we don't know why.
We do know why, but I don't think we have enough time to get into that.
Time, yeah.
We know why olive oil.
We don't know.
We know why olive oil is the only oil or fat ever to enter our bodies if we want to really have a great life. Oh. Anything else, I always tell not my patients, but when Alzheimer's Society or when we talk to the public, I said, go home, take out a box, put in the butter and the canola oil and the whatever other fats and spreads and oils you have, wrap them nicely and send them to your mother-in-law and use only olive oil. Only olive oil.
It's
for everything and anything.
downfall.
You can bake with it. You remember Flair's?
Yeah.
The brilliant restaurant in Moeraki? I think it's no longer there.
Yeah, no, she's retired. Yeah.
One of her desserts was an olive oil-based orange cake.
Oh, I know. It's lovely, that.
Amazing. And people tell me, how can you bake with olive oil?
No.
Flair managed.
Yeah, no, you can. And you can make a really nice carrot cake with olive oil as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And olive oil specifically enters the central nervous system and encapsulates some of the molecules that are associated with the death of brain cells. So in a way...
So is there a difference between Italy and Spain and the rest of Europe, for instance? Because they have a lot more olive oil in dementia rates.
That's complex. You see, that just because people have something doesn't mean that they use it intelligently and in combination with other nutrients. Because it is the combination. We know, for example, that in countries where there is a high consumption of fatty cold water, cold oceans fish like salmon or king mackerel or sardines, they have less dementia. So people said, what is it? It's the omega-3 in the fish.
Yeah, we've
So let's have omega-3. But every single trial with omega-3 failed to prevent Alzheimer's.
Oh, really?
Because food is so complex, you can't isolate one little molecule out of the fish and say, Because in countries where people eat fish, they also have different habits around food.
Yeah. They eat them with the different things.
And they eat much less dairy products. Yeah. Think of Japan.
Yeah.
Dairy products were not a thing in Korea or Japan or China for many years because they had no way to refrigerate them.
Yeah.
So nobody, it wasn't a big thing.
Yeah.
But Europe took a different route when it came to nutrition. So nutrition is a package. It's never one single ingredient. And that's the beauty of the Mind Diet. It simply is a nutritional plan of 10 food sources or nutritional sources that you must have,
Right.
and 5 that you have to avoid completely.
Oh, right. And if you've these are modifiable risk factors for developing
All of the dementias.
all of the dementias
Although
together.
mostly proven for Alzheimer's disease,
Right.
because it is the common one.
Right.
So it's easier to do studies around.
And are there things that, like doing this, if you've already got dementia but you're at an early stage, will that help slow the progression? Or are there other things that will help slow the progression?
The jury are out. I haven't come back with a definite answer around these modifiable factors, but there are other interventions that, again, we are not sure how they exert their impact, but they are very, very effective in slowing down the progression of dementia,
Right.
and some of them are also preventing dementia. So there is this yogist meditation called Kirtan, Kirtan. Kirtan yoga meditation has been studies and sponsored by the American Association for Dementia Prevention.
Yeah.
They studied that specific meditation, showing that if you practice that every morning for 12 minutes,
Yeah.
you will prevent dementia, and you will definitely slow down the progression of dementia.
Wow.
Another way to slow down the progression is personalized music.
Wow. And that by personalised, you mean that it's okay for me to listen to AC/DC because that's what I like?
Oh, God, you are in trouble. Maybe you should make time to see me in our outpatient. Actually, why personalized? Because music is emotional.
Right.
And what makes you react and respond to a musical sound
Yeah.
is different from me.
Right.
I react to Glenn Gould playing piano sonatas.
Right. So, but is, like, AC/DC aside, is classical music
Very much
different,
aside.
different to,
Yes,
to pop
yes.
music?
Studies
of
have
some
shown that the classical music is a uniquely challenging stimulus for the brain to, for want of a better word, understand. You know, people who listen to classical music for a long time, they sort of, they can tell you a lot about what the piece is.
sort. Okay.
Our brains integrate the sounds of classical music in a very different way than, you know, the words of a song.
Ah.
So classical music is a unique challenge to the human brain, but any personalized music that moved you when you were younger.
Right.
So we interview people and we talk to their loved ones, and we find out that you were, I don't know what, a great jazz person when you are adolescent. So if you now have, God forbid, dementia, 20 minutes a day of attentively listening to jazz would change the progression of the disease.
That's interesting. 20 minutes a day. Okay, that's not a lot, really. That's, you know, while you're having breakfast or something, yeah. We've just got a couple of minutes left to wrap up.
Okay.
Last thoughts. Coping with dementia.
I think do not despair. Do not let therapeutic nihilism lead the way. There is a life with dementia. There is much that can be enjoyed with family and friends. But I think beyond that, invest in your brain health. We all need to, and the sooner we start, the better. So maybe not go down fatty lane, next time you're thinking of a snack.
Apples.
Maybe. An apple a day keep the doctor away. You remember that one
Yeah,
when we were growing up?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's completely true, but maybe a salmon a day keeps the doctor away.
And that balance of fresh fruit,
Yes.
fresh vegetables, lots of fresh fruits. I guess the other thing is looking at like mind games, like crossword puzzles and jigsaw puzzles.
Cognitive
and
exercise or cognitive engagement.
Do they actually help?
Most of them are completely useless because people think, I always get that when I talk to in public. People say, oh, I'm fine, I'll never have Alzheimer's. I say, oh, great, tell me why. Says, oh, I do Sudoku every day.
Yeah.
I said, God, are you in trouble? Because
Sudoku
if you
is not
think
gonna-
about it, not that Sudoku isn't hard to solve whatever is needed, but it is based on nothing that is new or novel to your brain.
Right.
It's just basic public school.
Yeah. So you're just adding the same numbers all the time.
Yeah. It's challenging, but it's not novel.
What about the cryptic crossword?
Exercise, same thing.
Once you know the rules, you see.
So I'm not saying it's not hard to solve a very complex crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
But is this going to prevent your brain from developing Alzheimer's? No.
So the key is
Cognitive
learning new
exercise
things.
it has to be novel.
Yeah.
And it has to demand that your brain synthesizes the new information in a way that will solve whatever it is you're doing, which is not happening in Sudoku or crossword puzzle.
Right. What about
Where is it
reading?
happening?
What about
When
reading?
you play bridge.
A bridge.
Playing bridge is brilliant because it ticks off all that is necessary for a perfect cognitive exercise.
What about 500 or euchre? That's the same, isn't it?
I've never heard of those, but
Yeah, I think we'll play
last but not least, centenarians, super agers, the world over,
Yeah.
are characterized by two things, except what we said about social engagement.
Yeah.
They listen to classical music
Yeah.
more than other people, and they read novels.
Reading novels.
Reading novels.
Fiction.
Good old Charles Dickens.
Right.
I mean, A Tale of Two Cities for me is probably the best book ever written in English.
Wow. That is a good note to leave on. Hey, thank you so much
Pleasure.
for coming along. That has been fantastic.
Thank you
yeah,
for raising awareness of
it's a lot.
dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and what we can do to do better for ourselves and the people we love.
Yeah. Hey, there's a lot to think about there. Thank you very much. Ka kite.
You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.